Hello, my name is Michelle, and you're listening to Profit is a Choice. Joining us today is Monique Becker of the Enlightened Nest and formerly Becker Home. Monique lives with her husband and sons in rural southeastern Pennsylvania in, as she describes it, an imperfectly perfect Victorian farmhouse. She offers design and custom window treatments to her customers. Monique has studied the psychology of design, and she shares that with us today. She believes that houses are living, breathing entities and that they are a direct reflection of who we are as people and who we can become. You're going to hear both of us share that we have been friends and colleagues for many years. We've both worked in custom window treatments and then have morphed our businesses over the years. Monique shares a bit of her journey in changing her business and how the psychology of design has made a difference in her life and in the lives of her clients. I even had some aha moments in our conversation, and I know you will too. Every day, empowered entrepreneurs are taking ownership of their company financial health and enjoying the rewards of reduced stress and more creativity. With my background as a financial software developer, owner of multiple businesses in the interior design industry, educator, and speaker, I coach women in the interior design industry to increase their profits, regain ownership of their bottom line, and to have fun again in their business. Welcome to Profit is a Choice. Hey, Monique, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So Monique, you and I have known each other for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
We met, right? Oh my gosh, I don't even know what year it was, but probably 2009, 2010.
Yeah, it's been a good 10 years, I would think.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? Back at the Custom Home Furnishings Academy.
Yes.
There you came for a class.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have been roommates at IWCE and hung out and done conferences together and courses together. And I've even had the pleasure of coming to stay at your home and eat your food and walk in the garden. And it's you are so warm and so inviting.
Oh, thank you.
You know, one of the things that just in general that I love about you is that you have strong feelings and opinions, but I've always loved and respected in you that you have space for people with different emotions and opinions. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when I just love how you do that, I think it all plays into what you're doing with your company now as well. Mm-hmm. But this drive and this desire to understand not only yourself and your surroundings, but to help other people look at their experiences and understand their surroundings. And so I just want to commend you on that, because I think that's what has really, I think it drives a lot of your life. I think it drives your business, but I would say it also, in my opinion, is what makes you a really great friend.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So tell us all a little bit about yourself, your business, and how you got started. And then we're going to talk about the pivot. So let's talk about where you started.
So I guess 10 years ago or so, to make a very, very long story short, I used to work in healthcare. So this is my second career. But about 10 years ago, my mom was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And it was one of those very instantaneous mind shifts for me, where life is too short and we really should be doing something that we love and something that we know we were put on this earth to do. And that kind of just brought it all home for me. And I realized that I was not in an area that I loved and that I could do my best work. So I had always had a hobby in sewing. And literally I sat down at the computer one day and I said, wow, wouldn't it be nice if I could just make a living sewing? And I literally Googled how to make a living sewing curtains, because I had just moved into a new house and needed really strange sizes, because I have an old farmhouse and the windows are really just wonky sizes. And so long story short, fell down that whole internet hole and landed at the Custom Home Furnishings Academy. And that kind of started that ball rolling. And I realized that, yeah, I can give this a shot and see what comes of it. And so took a bunch of classes there and started my own workroom. And as things progressed through the early years, people would ask me, well, you know, how do I pick a paint color for this now, and what rug should I get, or should I move my furniture this way or that way? As I was getting more and more of those questions, I realized that, well, I really love sewing, but I also really love the design part of things. And so I morphed from doing just workroom business to doing design work as well. And I've been doing that since 2008, 9. I guess that would make sense. It's been 10 years. And so along the way, I've really enjoyed it. I've loved it. But there still felt some underlying piece of me felt that something was missing. And for me, as you described in the beginning, it was very much that personal, emotional, one-on-one connection that I felt was missing, not necessarily between me and my clients, but the clients and their space. Because there's always this point in the design process that somehow I have this ability to really pivot and pinpoint in and know when the end result is going to fit their needs, not just on a physical, beautiful level of beauty, but on an emotional level as well. And so I really wanted to see if I could tap into that a little bit better. So I ended up going and taking a course that I'd heard about in design psychology. And it was a year-long certification program and taught by a associate professor from Princeton. And the two of us consulted and worked together for a year on getting those pieces unraveled. And how do you tap into some of that information for people when you're working in their space? And so as a result, I have gone and rebranded my business. So originally, it's called Becker Home, but I've since rebranded into a new business called the Enlightened Nest. And that is basically taking all those great services that I've done through Becker Home, but also adding in this new level of service to help people really tap into that emotional and social growth that they can have when their home is really fully completed for them.
I find that you can see now why I said at the beginning, I think all of these years have moved you this, because it's been almost a personal exploration as well, right?
Right.
And when you have kind of in your own life and business tapped into what these things mean for you, you have experienced the psychology of design. And it does change the way, I mean, everybody has a way that they approach their work, right? And I know that you went through quite a few years there, because we've talked and been in touch and done masterminds and groups and things. And so you had some space in between where you first started and what you've done now. That was really this discovery piece. I want to share this part because I think there are so many creatives out there that we start in one direction and we think that's the direction we have to stay. I just had an earlier podcast with Angie Avard Turner, who is an attorney who started off as an attorney and then decided she didn't want to practice. And instead she did a creative business. And now she's back practicing law for creative companies. So she's, pivoted and moved and changed and all of that. And so, but let's be real here, Monique, when you're in that process of here's what I'm doing, it started off great, but I'm feeling like there's a small piece missing, right? It creates a tension, and it creates almost a disturbance of, not a bad way, but it creates this, I guess tension, this unsettled, that there's something more. And I don't yet know, right? There's this feeling of there's something more. Sometimes we may know quickly what it is, and sometimes we might not. It may take us a while. And I know that you looked at other things, right? Historical design. You really took like a list of, here are the things that I really am drawn to, that I care about. You live in a very historic home. How old is your home?
About 165 years old.
Yeah. So, right, which I think is amazing. I told you when I visited, I'm like, hey, we're from the South, Sherman, Bone, all her buildings. We don't have around here that's like
Yeah.
165 years old. Not in Atlanta, but so there is this character and this charm and this beauty. And so I know that you've done quite a bit of historical work in your own area, both preservation. So I know you went down that path. You've tried some other things. Talk to us a little bit about that tension and that discovery process and what that looks like and feels like, because you were still running Becker Home. You have been still running it this entire time. And that creates its own tension of I'm doing what I need to do to run the business that I'm running, yet looking for this missing piece of the puzzle of where I want to go next or what I want to add to or how I want to further develop it. Let's talk about that tension and that discovery process.
Yeah.
When do you think it started? How long did it last? Just describe it to us a little bit.
To me, personally, I kind of feel like I go through this like every 5-year shift in what I'm doing professionally that needs to be tweaked in some way or another. And I don't know if that's just natural for everyone, that everyone, people change jobs. Nobody ever retires from the same company that they started with like they did, 50 years ago. Everybody's constantly shifting and moving, and maybe that's what I'm feeling. But I've always had this need to grow. No matter what I'm doing, once I master what I'm working on, I'm like, okay, did it, check mark, check the box. What can I do next? And some of that that drive in me feeds into this tension process. So when the two meet, it's kind of like this mini implosion inside, and tension is the perfect word. I generally don't know where I should head next. It's one of those things, I'll know it when I get there, and which usually results in me trying out all these different things. Like you were talking about the historical design. I thought, well, maybe that should be my niche. Maybe I should focus on historic interiors because I love it. I think it's a passion of mine, but it still didn't feel like a right fit after I went through all those steps. And it wasn't until I'd stumbled upon the design psychology piece that the last puzzle piece fell into place. So in that interim, it's a lot of turmoil. It's a lot of being and sitting uncomfortably, with yourself, but not only sitting there, being okay with feeling uncomfortable. And that's the hardest part for me personally, is having to wait. I tend to be very impatient, and I'm a problem solver. That's one of my, when, you take those rate your skills, problem solving is right up there for me at the top. And so when I can't come up with a solution immediately, it's very frustrating for me. And so for me to have to sit in that waiting period to kind of let things flush out and turn into something tangible is difficult. So just being able to walk that path, knowing that at the end you will, something will be there, but not knowing what it is or what it looks like is always the most challenging part.
So I've been through, quite a few of these as my business has changed over the years. And it's interesting. I think one of the very first ones that I remember was before I went in as, part owner in CHF Academy. That, oh my gosh, that tension. But the biggest tension for me was when we sold, and between that and starting my coaching business. And the cool thing was, I'll say, is I had learned to become aware of the feeling in my body, like the physiological feelings of that tension. The first maybe time or two when I was like on the cusp of something big that was going to shift or change my business, I didn't quite recognize what those feelings were. And so they showed up and I felt anxious, or I felt frustrated that I couldn't solve it quickly. It's like it showed up and I interpreted the feelings in a negative way.
Right.
Okay. All right. So once I'd gone through that a couple of times and I realized, sat back and thought about, okay, wait a minute. When's the last time I felt like this? Like I can almost feel, I get this feeling that goes, oh my gosh, something big is getting ready to happen. Like something, and I don't even know what it is, but it's coming. I don't even know how to explain it to you, but I know in my body what it feels like. And so when it happened back in 2012, and it happened probably around July, August, And I knew that no change was going to happen until probably January of 13, because of, wrapping up some things and my health and all that other good stuff. I thought to myself, all right, Michelle, you know this feeling. You recognize that the last couple of times it's happened, something really big is kind of broken through on the other side. So you can choose to be irritated and frustrated and kind of outdone at why it's not coming faster. Or you can sit back and recognize these feelings and re-identify them, if you will, as excitement and building and anticipation instead of anxiety and frustration. Kind of the same thought process. I think Simon Sinek said that when you feel your adrenaline pumping, that feeling of fear and anxiety is the same as excitement.
Right.
It's mentally how we categorize the feeling in the body, right? So like, let's say you're going to get up and go on stage. I can say, I'm so excited, I'm so ready, I can feel it in my body, or I can say I'm scared spitless to go up there. But the feeling is going to be the same. So once I recognized the feeling and thought, I'm just going to lean into this feeling and I'm going to give it space, because I know that there will be something that will resolve if I let it happen at its own pace. I actually learned to enjoy it, to enjoy the process of discovery instead of just trying to get it done to move on. And I know that in my coaching practice, the men and women that I work with, many times we're in a tension position. And when we're there, granted, sometimes the tension is a negative tension and we want to get out of it quickly. But sometimes it's this building, and we need to kind of lean into it a little bit, don't you think? And give it time. I know some of mine have been as much as 6 months long.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's kind of 6 months to a year is about the longest. And when I say a year, I won't say that it was an intense year. I'll say that it was happening. But I've had it where it's been very intense for probably 4 to 6 months. What was your time frame like?
I'm going to say, well, I think you probably were there with me when it all kind of came crashing down on me, that moment that I needed to do something different. And we were at, I think it might have been the first workroom conference 2 years ago. Was that 2 years ago, maybe? Anyway, I was there and I ran up and I saw you just to say hi, and I broke down into tears because I knew that, like, I'd had, like, the entire conference, I'd had this whole building of stuff was happening, and my oldest was going to be going off to college, so I had that over, that was probably the biggest trigger. And then, all these pieces of the business that I had weren't quite fitting, and I knew there was something else, and I knew, but I couldn't figure it out, and I couldn't see it. And so that was kind of the beginning of the journey. And up until, that was a good year. I mean, from that point forward, it was a good year to just live with that feeling and kind of tease it out and see what that led to. So, I mean, it was scary because I had no idea what I was doing. I thought I'd found my niche in general, just moving from healthcare to starting my own business, which was fantastic. Would never go back to working for anybody else again. But then I was like, oh no, did I make a mistake? And so it was a good year process to just live with those feelings and see where they shook out.
Yeah. And I remember, you had, even when we met at Adaptive Textiles and Janelle's workroom, right? And that's when you were even talking about doing some of the historical piece, but not sure if it was really going to fit. But, so there was even more tension, I would say, prior to that particular breakdown moment that you described. Just saying that for all of us, these are not necessarily always resolved quickly. And sometimes we have to try multiple paths to find the one that works for us. So you found yours. Tell me, or tell our listeners, if you will. So when you heard about the psychology of design, there are so many ways that we can go in design. There's general design, there's biophilic design, there's, green design, there's psychology of design, there's the color of design. I mean, there's like fill in the blank, which is beautiful, right? That means there's so many ways to do it. what was it about hearing about the psychology of design that you think kind of hooked you? And then what was it that kept you there?
So I went to a seminar on the process, and basically the presenter took us through almost all of the same steps that I do with my clients. So having gone through that process during the seminar, I was like, oh my goodness, wow, this totally feels right. This fits. And I'm like, this is that missing piece. And it was just the connection that I was able to make on an emotional level with the process that I didn't have with any other experience. So for me, that emotional connection is absolutely necessary between our homes and living in our spaces. I mean, we spend most of our time in our own home, and so being able to feel a level of comfort and connection in your space is really what this is all about. And how do you find that emotional connection? And what is it that gets you there? I mean, how do you look at one paint color and compare it to another, and what's that emotional connection? How do you find that, and how and does it really matter? And it absolutely does, which is what the whole process takes you through. How do you go from just having a basic shelter of a home that just suits your basic needs to having a home that actually fits your social growth and your emotional growth and supports you in those areas of your life so that you can go out and be the best version of yourself?
So let's break that down even more. So when you say that the process that he took you through was very similar to the process that you had been using, give me like a very detailed example of this connection. Like, I understand the connection with color.
Right.
I had a client one time she was not a designer, and she was actually a homeowner, and she was a design client for me, not a coaching client. But her husband had come in and painted the house, and she got depressed. Mm-hmm. And I asked her, when did the depression start? Right. She's like, when my husband painted the family spaces. And I was like, oh, okay. And I said, well, I'm thinking to myself, what color did he use? It was a pretty generic color, but it was one that had very gray undertones. Mm-hmm. And she immediately said to me, I am so affected by color that the fact that it is on every wall, she said, I feel ill in my own home. Right. Like, I don't want to go home. I don't want to be there. I want to be out of the space. And I said, did you know that did you try the color? Did you know that you were going to have this reaction? And it literally came down to they had to repaint a good portion of the space. Right. Because she had such a physical, emotional, and mental reaction to an undertone in a paint color. Right. And so I know how it can work with paint, but give us some other examples of maybe how he led you to do some type of an emotional connection. Because I think color we all can kind of get. You can look at a color and go, I like it, I hate it, it makes me feel a certain way. But what other elements are involved in this?
I'll give you the prime example that when it kind of hit that proverbial hit me like a ton of bricks, like this was the way I knew I needed to go. When I went through the exercises in the program, we look at your past, present, and future experiences of place. And this primarily, a lot of the work is done in the past in terms of looking at our childhood experiences of place. And we do some visualization exercises, and really helps us to try to pinpoint moments in time where we felt at peace, and we felt calm, and we felt whole. And looking in our mind's eye, where was I in that time? What did that space look like? What did it feel like? And taking those good bits and pieces of those memories and creating them in your current space. And now this is not literally taking, oh yeah, here was my favorite grandma's house. We're not going to recreate grandma's house in your house. We're talking about taking, not only color, but perhaps architectural elements or
what about smells?
Smells, moods.
Like with candles, or you know what I mean?
So, for example, I did a visualization exercise. I did that, and I ended up through that exercise and taking me into this deep, deep dive of a wonderful childhood memory of place. I found myself on my backyard swing as a child. There was it was just a rope and a board, and I would swing on that all the time, all day, and it was in this huge, huge tree, and I remember swinging really high and looking up into the tree and back. That was just the memory was this tree. Well, in my current house, we have a huge tree in the backyard, which unfortunately is in a really horrible spot. It's too close to the house, and I really would love to add a porch on the back of the house, but I can't because the tree's in the way. Well, my husband's like, well, let's just cut it down. And I literally have turned into a tree hugger over this tree, and I couldn't figure out why. And I'm like, I literally would get sick to my stomach thinking about cutting this tree down. And it wasn't until I went through that visualization exercise that I realized, it's my tree. Because every time I go outside in my current house and I look up, like I get those instant feelings from childhood of being in that tree and carefree and peaceful and life is grand and everything's wonderful. And to me, there's no way we could take that tree down, because it just is a piece of me. It connected me. It's got me rooted literally to the ground in stability and emotional connection with my physical space. And so what I realized was that I needed to recreate that feeling somewhere. And I have an office space in the second floor of my home, and it happens to have a window seat, and that side of the house is surrounded by trees. And when I sit in the window seat, I feel like I'm in that tree again, like I'm in that swing. And so by acknowledging that there is that connection there and that it is important, I think that's the key piece, that it is important. It's not a casual, oh, that's a sweet story. It is actually physically, mentally, and emotionally important to incorporate that into my life somehow. So by, the tree is still in my backyard, but, up in the house, I have created that same sense and that same feeling because I'm sitting there in the window seat, which is very cozy like my swing was, and I'm there. I feel like I'm there in the leaves of the tree. So that is kind of a prime example of how we can take those memories and structure them so that they create a functional space for us in our homes.
I love that so much. For me, there were things like I'm a color lover. I love color. And you now make me want to sit down and rethink about some of my memories in my childhood or even, youth,
Right.
and just thinking, what did I love and what did I enjoy? I know some of my most favorite times have been when I was outside,
Right.
because we played outside
Right.
all the time. I didn't live, it's going to sound crazy, I didn't really live in my house.
Right. Right.
I mean, it's different,
Yeah.
right? I did not live inside my house. I pretty much was at school on my bike, tooling through the neighborhood, making, dirt pies in the backyard or something. We were playing in the fields. We were in the garden. We were down in the creeks. Like I was outside.
Right.
And it's interesting. About a year and a half ago, we had at 3 a.m. in the morning, we had a big oak tree fall on the back of our house. And it took off our back deck and crashed into our family space, broke the ridge beam across the back of the house. So it went from one side of the house to the other, kind of the damage. And, at 3 a.m., you're not expecting, it sounded like a plane hit the house. You're not expecting it. We're very blessed. Nobody was hurt or injured. But then it was time to rebuild. And one of the things that my husband and I started talking about is, well, we got to rebuild the deck off the back of the house. It's up 2 stories. And we both were like, we've always kind of wanted a screened in porch. Why don't we go ahead and add on and go ahead, if we got to rebuild the whole thing, they're here, let's just go ahead and add on to that. And so we did, and we screened it in because we have a small creek running through our backyard. So if we don't, we're in the South, with mosquitoes and bugs. You wouldn't even be able to sit out there. We put up a fan. I put a great big long picnic table, like a farmhouse table out there, real cozy seating, hung ferns and all kinds of stuff. I say all that because when I'm out there, immediately I felt it like that's the space out of my entire house. And I've got a great house. That's where I wanted to be, was on that porch. Because it made me feel like I was in a tree house. It made me feel like I was outside. I literally can feel the stress in my house from business, life, whatever. It feels like in some ways when I walk out on that back porch, I'm not even kidding you, like I've escaped.
Yeah.
I feel like I can leave things in here and walk out there, and it's a whole different experience.
Exactly.
I never really had words to put to it, except for the fact that I almost felt burdened to come back in my house because I wanted to stay out there. And so I looked at Joel and I was like, why? We've been in our house almost 21 years. Why did we wait 19 years to build that? Like if I had known how much that one space fed my soul, I can promise you we probably would have had him build it on when we moved into the house. But I had no idea, because when you're out there, you're 2 stories up and our backyard drops down. So when you look out, all you see are trees and leaves around you. And it literally, and then you can hear the creek in the back. So it feels like you're at some mountain cabin. And I'm in my backyard on the porch. So so I now you're making me even think and see that space in a different way and understand the connection back to that's the way I grew up. Everything was outside. We just didn't. We slept in the house. We didn't live in the house.
And so in that example, you're not as an adult woman, you're not out in the backyard making mud pies, but you've recreated the space with the memory and the feeling that you had from those childhood experiences, where you can retreat and sit anytime you want, and instantly you feel differently in that space. And that's what this is about, with pulling in elements of design psychology that help you feel differently in your space. And when you feel differently, you perform differently, you act differently, you behave differently. So it's about how your environment impacts your life and how you then take that change in yourself and go out and be a better person in the world.
So what's interesting too is my sons laugh, and they've picked on me for years. And their comment is, Mom doesn't have one office in the house. She uses every room as an office. Right. So, and I do have one main office for sure. But what they have noticed is that I would pick up, and they might come in, one day at the end of a school day, I would be sitting in the dining room. Another day, I might be sitting in the kitchen. Another day, maybe on the floor of the family room. Another day, maybe in my office. And they would say to me, Mom, why are you all over the house? What are you doing?
Right.
And for me, what I realized is I felt differently in all my different spaces. So based on what I had to do would be the room I would sit in. If I needed to focus on something financial, I usually go to the dining room because it's a lot more
structured, perhaps.
Kind of structured and formal. If I wanted to be super creative, I would be on the floor of my family room with things spread out all over me, because I have room in there to spread things out. If I wanted to be a bit utilitarian, I might be sitting at the kitchen table or on the island in the kitchen. But I knew that. And I said to them, based on what I'm doing and what I'm creating, certainly if I'm with a client, I'm usually in my home office with the door shut. But I just about cannot create the same way in the space where I work. I have to get up and move. And I think that's important that you said that we do feel differently. And there's nothing worse than also having such a cookie cutter design experience that when you go into it, it's beautiful visually, but there's no feeling and connection. Right. So we don't want that. We want our clients to feel like it's their space and that they're connected with the things that they love, evoking the emotions that they want. Sometimes I'll say even to people, and we use color a lot for the explanations, but you could use texture, you could use anything. Like, tell me how you want to feel in this space at the end. Like, what is the feeling that you want to have? Now tell me what elements make you feel that way, right? Which is that connection back. Like somebody might say, I want to feel soothed by colors of nature. All right, well, my colors of nature might be blue and green and beige. Theirs may be beige and brown and gold and red. Like, what does that mean, right? For me, nature may feel this way. For them, it may feel that way. So really digging down.
And a lot of it is a lot of it is that people can't answer that question either. If you say, well, why is it that makes you feel that way? They're like, I don't know, it just feels good. That's what this process does, is help you figure out the whys. So it's so much easier for clients to say, yes, this is exactly the right sofa for me. Because, okay, so when I was a kid and, I spent summers on my grandparents' farm, and I would go into the barn and I would, pat the horses' noses. That was such a wonderful experience for me. And now this velvet sofa feels exactly like that horse's muzzle. It's like that's the type of connections that we're making, and people don't even recognize or realize that those are legitimate and important connections. So by being able to tease out those really deep pieces, it helps me make better design choices for them. Hands down. I mean, comparing just a regular design process versus the my design from within process, there's no comparison, because I instantly know, okay, well, this fabric's going to be a no-go because it's rough and uncomfortable. I know exactly where to look for something that's going to fit their needs. So it makes my life, a million times easier, and it gives them something that they can connect to.
Well, and I think in some ways too, when you come back and show them the design and you say, and I chose this for you because of this. This is because of this. You are creating the connection that they now can affirm and solidify moving forward, right? So that then when other people come in their home, there is even a different level of pride in that space because it was created with them in mind, like at their core level. I read and doing some reading for another project I'm working on the other day. It's like we never really forget anything. Like our memories are stored. Every conversation, every word, every phrase is stored in our brain, whether we have access to it and it's on the forefront or not. But it does, those neural pathways have been defined, and they actually do, whether we recognize it or not, kind of feed into the decision making that we do. Just like when you can hear a song and it takes you back to senior year of high school.
Yeah, same idea.
And it takes you over here. It's not in your mind maybe all day, every day, but you can hear it and see it. There's something that connects you and pulls you and draws you. And so when you're thinking about that, we've been talking about it in some private groups I'm in with regard to building connections with people. But when you think about building connections with things and with your space and with texture and color and feeling, it takes on even more importance. Monique, do you find that this is something that everybody could benefit from? I tend to think on my side, everybody could benefit from it. But I think there are some people that are so closed off emotionally that they would have a hard time going through this process.
I'm not going to lie. It is an emotional process. I will say that it's not therapy. It does not qualify as therapy. I don't perform therapy for people.
Oh gosh, we do enough therapy just working with husbands and wives on a team, right? There's so much
counselor,
there. But I know what you're saying. Yeah.
But it is, you have to be open to uncovering some of those layers. And I always tell people that if there's any exercise I ask you to do that makes you uncomfortable, you do not have to do it. This is not about uncovering childhood trauma. This is not about bringing up horrible memories. It's about
this is the
good stuff. Yeah. And so you have to be willing to go through that journey. This isn't just let me meet with you for an hour and come back and here's your design plan. We get together a minimum of 3 times for 2-hour sessions. Each session covers either a past, present, or future, and it is an actual process. So it's not. You have to be willing to take the long journey with me, and you have to be willing to be open to ideas that come up that you may have thought were silly. You may have thought, well, that tree in the backyard, it's just a stupid tree. What's the big deal? And you have to be willing to acknowledge that connection has an emotional tie for you, when before you may have thought, well, that has no bearing whatsoever on my need for, a treehouse feeling porch. You have to be willing to say, okay, there is a deeper level of emotional connection between things. It's so ingrained in us that things don't bring happiness. And yes, to a point, yes, that is absolutely true. But in this instance, there is a difference. If you have to surround yourself with things, like you do in your home, you want to make sure that you are selecting the ones that are going to touch you and feed your soul, as opposed to just living with what you have to live with. And I see this a lot in people that have a lot of family heirlooms that they can't get rid of. We discuss this a lot with a lot of my clients in that they like, well, I have this coffee table from my mom. It's perfectly good. I hate to get rid of it. But I'm like, well, do you love it? They're like, no. Okay, so what could you do with that space if you could allow yourself to give that a new good home? It's a lot of that sparking joy, Marie Kondo kind of thought process. I mean, when you look at that table, does it spark joy for you? If it doesn't, we need to have a serious discussion about getting past that guilt factor of letting some stuff go. That's a huge piece of this for a lot of people. So, in terms of trying to find and tap into, am I going to feel better keeping that coffee table, or am I going to feel worse? We have to figure out how to balance that.
And I think too, especially in an area like you are up in the Pennsylvania area, you're working with people, historic homes, family heirlooms. I mean, we're not to say you're not working with very contemporary spaces. I'm certain that you have that opportunity. But there is a lot of familial kind of ties to what people have, right? Which could be very different than if you're in a loft downtown in a city. There's still this emotional connection. It still works, but it's just different, right? I know even for me, I've got antiques in my home, and there would be plenty of designers that could walk in and go, we need to clear all that out and do it like this. But for me, when I look at them, they make me think of something. I'm attached to them. I can easily tell you the things in my house that I'm not attached to. And when it's time to redo it, I'm going to bless them and release them.
Exactly.
And be happy
Thank you for the job you've done for me, but it's, you can go do a job for somebody else now. Yeah.
Okay. So you're going to laugh at this. So I have oh my gosh, we bought this chair maybe 2 years after we got married. So I have like a 27, 28-year-old chair over here. It is a wing back Queen Anne recliner with I don't even remember what that green was back in the
Hunter
early
green.
90s. Hunter green with the gold and the yellow. It's a flame stitch. Okay. Now, it is a darn good chair because it is still comfortable and it still holds up. It's in my office. I moved it here as a holding place because I was going to have it recovered. So we were talking about when we get ready to redo a couple of things, we have one more year of college to pay for. And then we can, we're done paying for other people's houses, other people's education. Love my boys, but we are getting a raise in May, right? Mama gets a raise in May. And so we've been talking about what we're going to do and which rooms it's time to update. And I was talking about things I was going to get rid of. And one of my sons said to me, do not get rid of that Hunter green Queen Anne chair. Now, this is a big 6 foot tall, big burly boy. And I'm thinking, that is such a girly kind of chair. Like, it's so feminine. That's the way things were in the early 90s. Everything was Queen Anne, high gloss, cherry, mahogany. I still have a good bit of that. He's like, don't get rid of that chair. And I'm looking at him. I'm like, why do you want this chair? We'll go buy you new chairs. He's like, I want that chair.
Yeah.
And I was like, why do you want the chair? Like, I could not for the life of me. And he remembers it being in the den of our first house. He remembers that's where we sat and read books. He has these very strong memories of that chair. I don't have the memories of that chair. I've got other memories. But there is something about this hunter green flame
Yeah.
stitch Queen Anne recliner that has his name all over it. And so I promised him I won't change it, I won't recover it, and I won't get rid of it. And when you go buy your house in the next year or so, you can have the chair. Now it'll probably go over there and he'll throw it away. But
You'd be surprised. He probably won't. He
may not. Maybe he'll go recover it. But I want to honor the fact that I was surprised, Monique. I was surprised. I would have never in all my life thought that's the one thing in this house he's asked for. The one thing in our whole house is he wants that chair. And I was getting ready to go like give it to Goodwill or something.
Yeah. It's funny how those things crop up, and until you start to walk around your house and kind of be like, yep, I can't bear to get rid of that. And not because you should keep it, but because you want to keep it. And you go through, and there's a big difference between should and feeling guilty about needing to keep it versus knowing that if you parted with that, it's almost that if your house caught on fire, what would you grab first? That's right. Kind of the emotion that you've got to go through. I mean, well, for yourself.
Or would you replace it with the same thing that you had there?
So your son, he's like, nope, that chair's coming with me. I'm going to load that on my back and hook it out.
Yeah, he's like, you can forget everything else in the house, Mom, but I'm taking the chair. So I'll give you another example that you're now making me think this way, right? Which is why I love doing the podcast and thinking different ways. But so I know you have a son who's just gone through, I think, first year of college here. All right. So when our youngest son was graduating from high school, that's a hard time. Things are shifting and changing all over the place in the home and in their life and everywhere. Okay. So we were in the process, just in general, of updating some spaces in the home. And one of them happened to be the half bath on our main floor. And when I say update, I'm talking about update light. So what that means is we changed the artwork. I made a new Roman shade, and we painted the walls. We got a new mirror and a new light. We kept the vanity. We kept the toilet. There's not much else in there. It's a tiny little water closet, okay? But we got new faucets and just updated a few things like that. He was so upset with us. He kept saying, why are you changing the bathroom? You're trying to be something we're not. Why are you? And I'm looking at him going, what are you talking about? Like, what? He just was so upset that the powder room was changing. Of all that, I didn't change his room. This isn't like you're going off, buddy. I'm taking over your room. This was a powder room that he rarely used unless he was on the main floor. So that was around May. He was having this emotional breakdown because we were painting and putting new window treatments in a powder room. All right. I was like, dude, you got to calm down. So we get through the summer. He comes back home in October, after being off at school. And he says to us, gosh, the powder room looks great. When did you guys redo it? And I'm like, probably about 4 months ago when you pitched a bid over it. But emotionally, he couldn't handle the change when we did it. He almost had to block it. Like he couldn't absorb the amount of things in our home and our life and in his life that were shifting and changing. And that made me realize too, that in design, we do have to lead our clients through a time for them to be ready for the change. Right.
You do have to be ready to go through this. I mean, it's all well and good to go through the whole process and then just sit on it. It really doesn't do anything for you except one, make you miserable, because now you have this whole future vision of what your soul and your heart are asking for, but you won't let yourself do it. So that, there absolutely is a process that you've got to be ready to go through it and to do it.
And so we know this process takes a little bit longer because you said there's a minimum of 3 meetings, 2 hours each. Do you offer this as an option for your clients, or is this kind of one of the only ways that you work with your clients?
Right now it's an option. Ideally, I would like to get to the point where it's the only way I do design, just because my own need is to also make that help people make that emotional connection. And I personally get more joy out of the work that I do, because it is amazing to watch that transformation. It is amazing I can pinpoint the moment when that light bulb goes off and people are like, yes, that's exactly what I want. I never knew it, but that's exactly what I want. And it's, we always talk about that great compliment clients give you. I never would have thought of that. Well, the reality is that I didn't think of it. They thought of it. I helped them figure out how to think of it and to tell me how to do it for them. So the reality is that everybody has this innate knowledge, this inner wisdom of what they know they need. My job is to help them find it. And ideally, I would like to be able to do that all the time for people. But for right now, because I am just beginning to transition, I'm doing it as an option.
So you're like a room whisperer.
Sort of.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. And it sounds like your clients, those that engage in the process, they get, like you said, the light bulb goes off. And it's the same thing in coaching for me. When I'm advising a client or coaching and that light bulb goes off, it puts them in the ownership position. Right. And they immediately go, oh, I own this space, or I'm going to, this is it. Like, this is what I want.
Right.
Or this is what I need, or I didn't even, and even better, I didn't even know that I needed it. And so now it has met this place in me that had no voice earlier. That's the way I feel about my back porch.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be honest, I didn't know I needed it. And it feels like it met a deep desire and need that I had not even given voice. And I probably hadn't given it voice because I didn't have it. I didn't think it was possible. I was too busy focusing on something else. And we had a horrible tragedy that resulted in something that I literally do not think, I'm not even kidding you, Monique, I could not move at this point to another home that didn't have something similar, or that didn't have the availability for me to build that space.
Right.
I'll tell you the next one for me. I grew up going to the river, going to the lake, and with a pool in my backyard. I grew up with the ability to stick my feet in water whenever I wanted to. Outside of a subdivision pool, I don't really have that. And that is my next big thing, is I need to be by water. I mean, I need to be by a body of water, not like a creek with mosquitoes in my backyard. I need to be by a body of water. And I recognize that. And we literally have to build 3 to 4 times a year in for me to get somewhere.
Yeah.
To have sand, water, like I need it. I can't even tell you what it is. It's
the flip side is imagine yourself without those things built into your life. How would you feel?
I cannot do it. I cannot do it.
One of the most poignant examples I've ever heard about this process is that people are like, why does this really matter? Does your space around you, you've got a perfectly serviceable home. It works well for you. What's the big deal? When they did research on this very question, and they compared, they looked at people that lived in subsidized housing. And what they found were that people that lived there, yes, they had a physical space, but they never called it home. It was never home to them. Yes, they lived there, they ate there, they slept there, but there was nothing about it that made it feel like home to them. And so their environment actually shaped the way they looked at the world.
Yes.
So when you look at that group of people compared to people that have that are surrounded by things that are meaningful, that give them flexibility to create change and to create warm space, if you will, just that adjective, compared to people that are forced to live in a space that they can't call home, that affects us. 100% affects how we live, how we act, how we behave. Mm-hmm. And so just by comparing those two groups of people, that gives you that perfect example of why space matters and why your environment matters and why the choices you make in your environment to make it look nice matter.
Okay, so interesting segue, just because I think it's interesting. You might too, and hopefully the listeners will. So I was at a book launch recently for two authors, Patty Callahan Henry and Mary Kay Andrews. They're both Southern fiction writers, okay? And they were talking about this search for home and what does home mean as a theme through some of their books and some of their writing, and how people relate to their spaces. And they gave an example of one person who had, let's say, like for me, I grew up in South Carolina. Okay. So I spent my first 21 years in South Carolina. And now I've spent, we'll say more than 21 years in Georgia. Right. But when I tell you I'm going home, I'm going to talk about South Carolina. Right. That's home for me, even though I've lived here, oh gosh, at least 30 something years more than I lived there. That's still home for me. But somebody else might look at that and say, I grew up in South Carolina, but Georgia is home. And so it's this, we each have a different connection to what is home for us, what draws us back, how we feel. And so I love the exploration of that as a space and a place, but also as bringing those elements into where we live and how we function and feel.
Right. And it's interesting. This is a great technique to use for people that are looking for a new home, because if you go through this process, you're moving and you go through that home buying process and look at all these houses. Well, how can you narrow them down? I mean, they may have this aspect, they may have that aspect, but to actually go through this process and, have a list of items that are non-negotiable for you in a new home, whether it's there immediately or you have the ability to create it, knowing that immediately narrows down your list. Do I need to find a place that, for example, is near water? Do I have to have that? Is that a non-negotiable for me? Giving you
I can see that.
Those things to build upon are going to help you, find the best place for you.
I know when we were looking for our first house, I mean, we had, of course, here's where we want to be, as far as drive time and all that other stuff. And I'd never, of course, bought a home. We were only, 23 years old. But I kept saying to my husband, when I walk in and feel it, I'll know. I'm not even going to tell you how many houses we looked at, but it was a lot. It was hundreds of houses, not always with an agent. We walked in them and I kept going, nope, that ceiling feels too low. This makes me feel closed in. This makes me feel uncomfortable. Now I knew I could paint. It wasn't about that kind of stuff. It was a feel of a house. And we still laugh at the fact that I was so irritated and frustrated at looking at houses that either I could feel it and we put down the contract and we got denied because somebody, there were 4 other contracts and somebody got it. Whatever reason we didn't get them, I was so irritated. So it's like 9:00 on a work night and we pull up to this house and the real estate agent gets out. By now, he's like a good friend of ours. After all these months, my husband gets out of the car and I refuse to get out of the car. And they're like, Michelle, you need to get out of the car. I'm like, I'm done. I am done. I've looked at enough houses. We're not going to find one. We're never going to find the house for us. None of them feel right. And if they do feel right, they feel right to other people and everybody's bought them. And, I was pretty much having a pity party and pitching a fit in the back of the car and I wouldn't get out. Anyway, Floyd, our sweet, sweet real estate agent, looked over at me and he softened his voice. He was about the age of my parents. And he was like, Michelle, please get out of the car. This will be the last house tonight. And so with that little huff, I was like, okay, but I'm just going to walk in and then I'm coming back out and you all can look, doing my thing. Anyway, so we walk in the front door and I turn and look at my husband. We haven't even gotten through the house. We walk in the front door and I said, this is it. And they're both looking at me. They're like, aren't you glad you got out of the car? I'm like, yeah, I'm glad I got out of the car. And then it was confirmed. And I think that is so crazy.
Yeah.
But there was a feeling when I walked in that house that I knew I could raise my family, that we could live and breathe and, and it had horrendous little wallpaper. I mean, there were things that could be done, but it was a feeling in the space. And I've never even thought about it until you said that. So I need to go sit down and figure out what's going on that makes me want to walk into a space or walk out, because I have visceral response.
And that's exactly what you do is you go through this process to pinpoint those responses and why and what they are so that you're not blindsided by them and you understand why you need to make this decision versus that decision. It saves a lot of marriages. I mean, honestly.
Yeah. If I had done all that work, we probably could have narrowed down our house search.
Right. Absolutely. That's part of it. It's like, no, I'm not even going to bother looking there because I know it's not going to fit my needs.
Exactly. So Monique, all of this is super interesting, and I know that others are going to be interested in what you have to offer and learning more about it. Tell our listeners where they can find you. Where are you hanging out?
So you can go to my website, theenlightenednest.com, and you can always find me on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram at The Enlightened Nest.
Perfect. Well, I will have all of that in the show notes, and everybody should be able to get in contact with you. Thank you so much for sharing about the psychology of design and really just making us think about it in a different way. I know sometimes we're working on efficiency, we're working on process, we're working on get in, design, get out. Not to say we're not spending great quality time with our clients, but sometimes it's easy to overlook the nuances of this to be expedient with the design process. And I think one of the things that makes this so interesting is that you're not trying to be expedient.
Right.
Certainly you have a process you're trying to get through it. You don't want it to drag on forever. But it's also a process that gives you time to dig in.
Right.
And that's a different model. And I will say for those that are out there thinking about it, it's also a different pricing model because you're talking 6 hours of design before you ever design. And so, we're not getting into that part today, but definitely know that it is a completely different model that needs to be considered.
And because of that, I have created a DIY program for this. So if you don't want to go through it with me, I've a lower price point option where you can go through all the exercises and the modules yourself.
Excellent. Well, Monique, I thank you again for joining us today, and I wish you much success with the Enlightened Nest.
Thank you so much.
Take care. I'm so thankful to Monique for joining us today and really encouraging us to look at our spaces differently than maybe we have before. Creating a home is a process, and so is creating a business. Don't feel like you need to struggle to do life, decorating, designing, or business alone. Join me and others in the Designer's Inner Circle to help meet your business needs. If you are a designer, decorator, stager, workroom, upholsterer, or another creative professional in the home industry, we have room for you. Go to scarletthreadconsulting.com and check it out, the Designer's Inner Circle, because you don't want to be on the outside looking in. Invest in your business because, as we all know, profit doesn't happen by accident.